Hello, friendly neighbors, and welcome to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. Americans are the most stressed people in the world, at least according to a recent New York Times article. In this article, they say in the U.S., where prosperity is on the rise, researchers pin the blame on declines in social capital and social support, and increases in obesity and substance abuse. Well, I couldn't agree more, and I would say that obesity and substance abuse in turn are an extension of a lack of social capital and social support because, hey, when you have no friends to tell you not to have that fifth donut and instead you're just kind of looking for dopamine from television instead of getting that serotonin you get from human contact, it gets all too easy to put on the pounds. Substance abuse, same thing. Then, according to Fortune magazine, another article from 2019, the U.S. is the most unhappy it's ever been. And again, they credit this with a breakdown in social connection. In another article, they said the average American has less free time than a medieval peasant. Okay, so bleak, right? Not exactly. There's a lot that we can do, and there's a skill set involved in community cultivation, which was known to people. If you look at all of the big buildings in small towns, it's the Masonic Temple, it's the Elks, Lions Club, all of these kind of groups, which are now really dwindling in numbers, because at one time, this was really the heart of where people went to cultivate their communities. Communities aren't housing developments, they're actively cultivated. And they're not cultivated simply by proximity. There's a value system that goes into the cultivation of these communities. Now, I want to share with you something that Godfather Xie, Yuzong, Tangzong, Lizong, and others in Sichuan and Shanghai shared with me as business mentors. Because one of the first things they had to share with me was why communities get cultivated, why they flourish, and why they disintegrate, as part of the cycles that we all enjoy as humans, because this is very important for setting up a thriving business. First of all, the basic cycles begin with violence and warfare. Now, how does something as peaceful as a warm and loving neighborhood begin with violence and warfare? This is because the fear causes people to team up. It really is every man for themselves, every woman for themselves, when everybody feels that they have enough. But it's when there's an external threat, a natural disaster, some type of external enemy who's trying to hurt people that causes people to team up. The ascending compassion is actually born of being in the thick of it together, being brothers in arms, of having to look out for your neighbors. Courage, organization, and assembling and feeding armies becomes the value. So the value is on how many people you are feeding. Who is a king? The king is the person who has the biggest armies. Armies require food. They march on their stomach. So the person who is providing is then the person of value. It's not the person who is taking the most. There is collective action and hierarchy, and this is considered in Chinese thought to be the green dragon rising. This is how groups coalesce and rise up, and this is kind of an image for spring. So in the springtime, everything is beautiful and flourishing, and this is because there's been that fear response which has caused the coalescence, and then people rise together. As it peaks, there's a flourishing, as those who return from war take with them the organization, the hierarchy, and the mindset to look out for the group as a whole. And you can see this in the West, in the World War II generation, with the different groups that they joined up into when they came back. And there's a TV show that I like called Peaky Blinders. You can see the same thing. There's an oppressed group of people, and when people are truly oppressed, they team up and they form different we'd call them mafia groups today, but they form different groups because the external government is definitely oppressing them, not going to let them get ahead, so they form their own groups in order to rise together. The rising is a chaotic start and it ascends into order. It's the act of going from chaos to orderliness. This is a circle of chaos becoming straight and orderly. Then, as life flourishes and everyone's having a party, this is said to relate to heart or fire. The next generation is born and they're more interested in individual pursuits because they don't have that fear anymore. The previous generation sheltered them. They start to develop more nuclear families. This isn't something that was created in the 1950s. The Song dynasties and Tang dynasties saw similar family structures changing to becoming smaller, more private yards, this kind of thing. There's more of a regard for one's own family, one's own wives and children, more than the community as a whole. So as it rises, people are saying, my people first, my community first. I will die for my community. As it peaks and people feel safe enough, then it becomes more about, well, my family comes first. And people will say that, hey, my family comes first. Now, of course, in all stages of life, there's a natural inclination for one's family to come first. But if people say this out loud, if it becomes the spoken agreement with everybody, then how can you team up? How can you form an army? How can you do anything useful? If there's a natural disaster and there's flooding and everybody's looking after their own house, they may get swept away. But if everybody leaves their house to go build a dam or divert the water, they have to temporarily look past their family and look for the community as a whole in order to protect their families. Neither one of these vantage points, I will say, is good or bad. It really depends on the situation. And this is as the central focus goes from orderliness back to chaos and from collectivism back to individualism. Individualism at its most extreme is anarchy, it is barbarism. Collectivism at its extreme is fascism. Neither place is very fun to stay at for long. The prevailing values become individualism and equality on the descent. They become collectivism and hierarchy on the ascent. Individual expression, more borders and divides come between people as they start to descend. People begin living instead of by the will of the strongest. During the ascent phase, it goes to the will of the strongest person who is looking past themselves. During the descent, it starts to go more from a heart-centered approach to more of kidney-centered, more in the loins. So if you look at the fall of the Tang dynasty, this came when the ruler was partying with his concubine all the time and taking her advice on ruling. So this kind of genital thinking destroys even the most powerful dynasties. Tang dynasty had something like 50% of the global GDP. And when it was rising, there was a lot of people were a little bit more Central Asian when they came over, the ruling dynasty anyway. And they were kind of Spartan in their mentality. There was a system where if you passed a test, it was very orderly. So if you passed a test, you could be promoted. If you failed it, you didn't. Toward the end of the Tang dynasty, it was whose family am I in? If you were in the ruling dynastic family, then you could get ahead. And you can even see this today in the US. So this is in contrast to when things are rising, it's the leaders in the community, the strongest people are determining who the social circles are. During the descent, everyone has enough food. There's no worry about safety or power. So then it goes to the weakest person. The person maybe with the least wisdom. Instead of the elder, it goes to the youngest. The respect for the social circle and community is non-existent at this point because basic needs can be met without any outside help because of inherited money or government's handouts. And this is the decomposition phase. And people who buy into this mentality are decomposing. They are perhaps inheriting, but they are spending more than they will ever make. And no matter how much you give them, they will probably lose it. Also, they have a blind faith in the eternal stability of governments because they've developed this fixed belief that things will always be safe and stable because that's what they grew up with. If you grow up with chaos, you have no faith in a government to take care of you. You don't have faith that the job will be there forever. But if you grow up with this kind of stability, you get this fixed belief. And in reality, people have no idea how vulnerable they are until you take a step back and look at world history. You see that governments collapse sometimes incredibly quickly. You see that jobs are not stable, and the illusions of stability create this kind of individualism. And once there is change, and there always is change, and there always will be change, then the people who have lacked the memory of regard for the collective are generally the ones who don't do so well. Culture is born of barbarism. It's fear of war and diplomacy that first creates inner cultivation and customs. Overcoming fear, let's start with that. It is a necessity when you're at the point of a spear. When your ability to have that poise means that you can move out of the way, or if you're frozen in fear and you get stabbed. When your family's on the other side of your body, overcoming fear isn't an option. And this is something that has to happen real time. It has to be those with poise live. And this inner cultivation carries over into civilian life to create kindness, compassion, and courage. It's remembering these hard-won lessons during the happier times which allows prosperity to cycle upwards. Every hero in the modern West today, you'll hear about the personal pursuit. But nothing is actually built this way. There's this myth of, oh, this person's a self-made man. He came from nothing and rose all the way up. Categorical BS. It has never happened. People get help. Anything that is extraordinary has come through teams of people. Author Seth Godin talks about tribes, but only in the sense of selling people stuff. He doesn't really get developing a true power base. He takes no responsibility for a tribe and doesn't sacrifice for them, and this is the key part. What's true in a battlefield, what's true in situations of natural disasters, is true of everyday life. And if you don't have the mentality of the community leader who's saying, hey, this flash flood is coming, we need to organize people quickly, and taking responsibility for the group, okay, I need you to go here, I need you to get sandbags. There's somebody who rises up in these kind of occasions. There are men and women who just, through a sense of compassion, feel more pain at not acting than they do in acting. They feel more fear in the inaction than they do in the action. So then, as a result, that it becomes their motive force. And most in the West today haven't been hurt or hungry enough in recent memory to really cultivate community and culture. The Greeks did so with Athens and the philosopher kings who had won that wisdom via extreme hardship. The Viking Eddas speak at length about etiquette in order to forge diplomatic relations. And this is because if you have somebody in your home and maybe they killed your cousin a week before and you have 3 days to leave the best of friends, otherwise there will be continued tribal warfare, can you risk insulting them? Of course not. So etiquette is born out of this necessity. It's built out of understanding how is it that you treat people within the military so that you're not killing each other and instead you have a unified force going forward. If I look at the typical way that most Americans will treat each other now compared to generations before, there's a subconscious statement that's always going on, and that subconscious statement is me first, you last. I'll give you an example. So I was in China with a group of friends and met up with some other people, and basically everybody there wasn't Chinese. So the table is set, banquet style. One guy gets up and he grabs food for himself and his kids and puts it on their plate first. And for the Chinese there, it was just kind of unthinkable. They were a little bit aghast. But for the Westerners, most of the Americans didn't notice. But then the next day at tea, the Americans were in a circle, and the other foreign family came, and nobody made room for them. And it was awkward, but nobody really understood why. And I just spelled it out. I said, well, look, subconsciously, what did they say? They said, me first, my family first. We're going to take first that which is life-giving, which is subconsciously saying, I want to eat, I want to live, and I don't care if you do. Serving others first gives the opposite impression. So these little things, may say, oh, well, it's cultural difference. One's not better than the other. No, that's not true. One will make a group stronger. One will make a group weaker. And I have all of world history as evidence for this. The respect for the subconscious body language is extremely high level when you have fighters of any kind, warriors of any kind. There's a respect for body language, because body language tells you when the person is going to stab, what they're going to do. So people are very attuned to other people's emotional states. EQ goes way up, as does intuition. And there's a respect for this, and so there's a respect for the cultivation of harmony. And this respect for body language, you still see in people who have grown up with difficulty, but with most Americans today, they're pretty deaf to it. They have no idea why it is that they have so few friends or so few close friends. And that's because the majority of the body language is saying, me first, you can die. And this creates anxiety and depression, and it's a big part of why the West is on depression medications. The good news is that this tells us a lot in terms of which formulas that we need to be using. There is a reason why we need to be moving qi and purging damp and opening metal further to remove the garbage and let the kidney qi rise again. People are rotting. They are spending unearned money. And the positive aspect of this is not that we will turn the culture around. It is not that it will change on the grand scheme of things. It won't. The cycle will continue. And those who team up now and remember the lessons of history will be able to thrive no matter what the change. And you don't have to be teaming up extremely well, just better than most people. So how do you do this? Godfather Xie took a few days to tell me about this. He said it relates to the Chinese concepts of heaven, earth, and people. Those who take more than they give are relating to the earth. They're the basest of people, and that is the majority. And as I say the basis of people, or the lowest, or the most related to earth, I do not mean evil. I do not mean that they need to be looked down upon. This is a mistake, and this is a separation. People who take more than they give are to be loved. And I'll explain as I continue. The next level of people are people who give and take equally. These are called central people, or they relate to humankind. The highest level, and again, not better, not worse, and I'll get to that, are people who give more than they take. And these are in the central motivations of people, whether they're motivated more by the limbic system, more by the fear response, or it's more heart-centered. People who relate to each of these will have a different gift from heaven. People who take more than they give, heaven gives them free time. If somebody is always asking to borrow money, pretty soon their friends stop calling and they get plenty of free time. People who are always looking for a discount, shopkeepers, business people, don't go looking to sell to them anymore because they don't want to be injured. So people who are really nasty or trying to use dominance displays over other people constantly, they also earn free time because they're still taking. They're trying to take energy from other people. They're taking. So they end up with the free time. People who give and trade equally, the reward from heaven is money. People who give more than they take, the reward from heaven is influence and power and respect. So, which is the best position to be? Well, here's the secret of life. All people are poor. The person with time, only free time, who takes more than they give, they cannot wait for an opportunity to get a job where they do as little as possible to get some money. They are doing everything they can to trade time for money. The person with money finds that they can only make so much money before the government starts to block them or take taxes from them. So they do everything they can to spend money in order to buy influence. The person with the influence and power has everybody coming to them, and the one thing that they lack is free time. So all people are poor, and the tragedy of life is that when we live as individuals, as individualists, we strive from one form of poverty to the next, and yet we always remain in a state of poverty. However, when heaven and earth merge, when time and power and money come together, and the true social classes merge together with a unified goal, that's when you create culture, that's when you create life. And when culture is in decline, you get a separation between those who have power, those who have money, and those who have time. Okay, so cool. Sounds like a business conference. What does that have to do with personal health, community health? Well, everything. Because when somebody has nothing but time, and you know that they're looking for a job, they're looking for money, you can hold that in your heart and you can give that to them and understand that they have free time, but not a lot of money. So giving them a gift that is something maybe they wouldn't have spent on themselves, that's a tremendous gift that will cause more harmony. The person who has money, they don't necessarily need something that they could buy for themselves. So what is their best gift? The best gift you can give somebody who gives and takes equally is an introduction. It's influence. And the best gift you can give somebody who has power and money, people think, wow, what could that person want from me? They have it all. They do not have it all. I'll tell you, they are dying to find a person of integrity who can take on their legacy, who can give them the gift of time. This is how you cultivate community. Community cultivation involves character change. It involves character cultivation. It is not easy to give more than you're taking. It is not easy to keep other people's life desires in your heart instead of your own worries. And yet, if you begin to do this with authenticity, with compassion, and with courage, you will form a beautiful life around yourself. You will begin to enter into this community that you're creating. And it's not that you have people. It's not that they're your people. A healthy community is infinitely networked. What you're looking to do is actually create the bagua. It's the idea that there's infinite outward growth and possibility, and that there are integrated relationships between all of the people. Some people have 3 solid lines. They relate to heaven. They're very holy people. Some people are very selfish by nature. However, it's the 9th palace is called the central intent, at the center of that circle or the center of that octagon. And that central intent is what creates the 9th palace. And this is incredibly important for the cultivation of culture and community. Now, what I've just said, what I've just spit out, I learned over about a 3-month period of time, and it took me about another 6 months to understand. I bumped into a lot of contradiction in myself because it wasn't aligning with the brainwashing that I had received, but that brainwashing was based on social class. It was based on history. Sometimes I would even say to my mentors, hey, well, what about this? And they would say, oh, that idea that you think is truth, Let me introduce you to the way the Catholic Church was controlling peasants. Let me tell you a little bit about the start of nationalism. And a lot of my ideas that just unconscious assumptions about life are and have been, in fact, side effects of political propaganda campaigns from centuries ago. And in the present, living my life with that kind of propaganda, I've learned to become more dependent on institutions than on my friends. I've learned to invest in companies more than my friends. I've learned to cultivate a middle-class home that's an expression of myself rather than a community. If we look at the value systems which have been created to take us from chaos to order, to civility, to peace and prosperity, and if that's the track we need to be on, then we need to change our minds. So in the last episode, I said, okay, your homework, if you choose to accept it, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to practice internal cultivation, but also begin doing something for somebody else to cultivate that community. And this is important because without that, there won't be enough depression medications. There won't be enough herbs to take care of it. The culture that you cultivate in this generation, in this life, is the one that will sustain you and carry you forward. Otherwise, what are you going to do? Keep paying different life coaches and business gurus to take your money and what? If they're asking for money, you know what level they're at. They're at the level of people who have time, who are looking to trade it for money. So a true business mentor wants your time. They do not want your money. And that's what has come to replace the wisdom from elderly, successful people. It's really the person who can market themselves the best and be maybe the most outspoken life coach. And that is exactly what you would expect on the descending phase. That's decomposition. Again, it's not bad. That's how money gets back in circulation. But when I think of the best life that I want to live, it's not one where I'm being eaten or decomposed or on my way to the realm of hungry ghosts where people are eating each other. It's one where we've cultivated a community on principle and on love rather than one that's on its way toward chaos and fear. Okay, maybe it's a little bit of a heavy topic. However, it can also be beautiful. And I've waited to talk about this for 3 years because in the time that I've been back from China after having learned this and been a protege and an apprentice, I've come back and applied it. And now, because my friends are thriving, because we're thriving together, I've gone back to China. I've talked about the kind of organized business that we've set up, the way that we're mutually supporting each other. And my mentors in China have said that now I've definitely got it. And because of that, because I've had their blessing on that, that's why I'm speaking about it now. And I'm speaking about it now because, yes, people are miserable overall. And it's not that we need to be. It's understanding that we're all in it together. We're all in the same state of poverty, trading time for money, money for power, power for time, striving to do that. But if we start using that central intent and say, hey, I have a lot of power, I want to give more power than the money I'm receiving or the time I'm receiving for that. That's when you start to get overflow. When you're looking for a job and you say, okay, I'm going to do this job, but instead of taking as much as I can, doing as little as I can and thinking that makes me smart, I'm going to give more. And for the person with money saying, you know what, I'm going to give more value than I'm taking. This gives an excess. It takes us out of a fear state that allows us all to thrive together as a community and takes us away from the fear-based life into the love, heart-centered life. And this is really what most religions kind of get at, So whether you use a heaven, earth, people model, as my Chinese mentors have, or a different kind of model, it's the same truth. And it's the same truth that we learn at every stage of these cycles in history. It's just a matter of kind of zooming back a little bit to see where we've come from, where we're going, and the lessons we learned at every step along the way. Thank you so much for listening to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Miles.